My name is Darius Fullmer, and for many years I was the organizer for the Animal Defense League of New Jersey.
Okay, and what are you doing here at the Animal Rights Conference in Los Angeles?
I'm talking about my experiences with the Huntingdon Life Sciences campaign and eventually the Stop Huntingdon Animal Cruelty, the SHAC 7 trial, in which myself and a number of other organizers who worked on that particular campaign were brought up on a federal charge of violating the Animal Enterprise Protection Act.
And what is the Animal Protection Act?
The Animal Enterprise Protection Act, later renamed the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, is a law which essentially states that if you physically disrupt an animal enterprise, which is any company that uses animals for profit, if you physically disrupt them and cost them more than $10,000 in damages, then you're guilty of this separate federal felony. Which is, of course, a bit ridiculous because any sort of activism is inevitably going to cause the targeted industry or the targeted company money, if you're doing it right, of course, over $10,000 in damages. And what is to physically disrupt the company? Any sort of activism, even if you're just handing out leaflets or educating people, even if you're talking to a school group about why they shouldn't consume animal products.
So there's a $10,000 cutoff on this. So let's say people are protesting puppy mills with a store. Does that fall in that same category?
Of course. The law is purposely written in such a broad manner that it can cover any sort of activism. Inevitably, anything is going to cross the $10,000 threshold, and physical disruption is a completely open-ended term.
And how does this work with freedom of speech?
Well, obviously, it's highly unconstitutional, and that's why we're challenging it in court. Our case was the first usage of this law in court, and now we see some other folks, or some folks in Utah and some folks in California, who are being tried under this law as well. So we're starting to see now that they've seen that it works in court, it's getting used more often. So we're challenging it in court, and then hopefully we'll be successful.
What drove you to get involved in the pursuit of helping animals?
Well, I originally went vegetarian. It was just something I never felt comfortable with. I always had a sense that there was just something wrong. Sort of the notion of do unto others as you would do unto yourself is something that always meant something to me, and I just couldn't live with myself eating animals anymore. I really wasn't educated about the issues. After that point, I started reading books and learned about the dairy industry and the egg industry and about factory farms, and that led me to being vegan. And from there was just a natural progression into activism. I'm just someone who isn't comfortable standing by and watching injustice. If it wasn't animal rights, it would be some other movement. There's a lot of injustice in the world, and we certainly have no lack of need for people to stand up and fight it.
So you're here talking about government repression, how people are prevented from this freedom of speech and their rights. What are some practical things that people can do to support what you're out there and have taken such a big risk in your life to do?
Well, what I'm really focusing on in terms of government repression is to remind people not to be afraid, because that's essentially how repression works. If you look at my case, it was a 2-year investigation. There were over 100 federal agents involved in the case. We had tens of thousands of intercepted emails, over 8,000 intercepted phone calls, and millions upon millions upon millions of dollars spent on this case. And the end result is a few of us went to jail for a few years. Now we're talking about a few people out of tens of thousands of people in this country and other countries on many different continents working on this campaign. Clearly they can't take everybody who's working on this campaign and put them in jail. So rather the idea is you take a couple people who are more publicly recognizable and you throw them in jail, and then hopefully everyone else gets scared into silence. So I'm here to remind people that the repression hinges upon fear, and if you're not afraid, then they can't stop us. They can only stop us by us choosing to silence ourselves out of fear. And even worst case scenario, if you are that one person who they decide they're going to spend millions of dollars persecuting, that's me, and look at me, I'm here.
What was life like in jail, and then what is it like now since you've gotten out?
Being incarcerated for me was a difficult experience, not in terms of the actual conditions. I tried to keep in mind in terms of the actual conditions. Even incarcerated in this country, you have it better than a lot of people in the world. I still had clean water. I still had access to health care, something I actually don't have on the outside. I had access to health care. I had 3 meals a day. I had a roof over my head. That's more than a good amount of people in this world have. So I've resisted the temptation to pity myself. What is frustrating is not having the ability to have a positive influence on the world around you. And I found that not only with myself, but even the people who committed, let's say, traditional crimes, drug dealers and so forth. The idea that you can't help anyone, you can't do anything to support your family or to better your community while you're inside. So that was certainly the most difficult aspect for me. But in terms of the day-to-day, it was nothing that I or I don't think anybody else couldn't handle. and it's certainly a lot less than what the animals go through. I mean, after a year I was released. That's something that they don't have the privilege of having.
Yes, that's what I was going to say, the correlation between incarceration of humans and incarceration of animals in our shelters or the labs or whatever, it pales of what they're going through. What are some of the future places you plan to go, and your fellow comrades that have gone through this? What are some of your thoughts and ideas about where you're going to go for the future?
The most important thing is that we make a stand, especially as the first people who were tried under this law, that now that we're out, we show people, and this public forum is a great place to do that, show people that, look, we're still here. It was a hassle, yeah, sure, it was a hassle, but we're still here, we're not afraid, we're still going to speak our minds, we're still going to be active, we're still going to fight for what's right.
How can you go out into the world, especially incarceration, there's a great prejudice. How do you go out and get work? How do you do things so that you can support the campaigns that you do?
Right, it's incredibly difficult, and especially in my case, I don't feel the least bit ashamed about my situation, even talking to people who aren't part of the animal rights movement. In fact, my current employer, my boss is a hunter, the guy who gave me a job, and he knows all about my situation, but he understands why I did what he did, and he respects that. So I don't feel any embarrassment in that situation, but it does really make it clear. I could only imagine if I was in for dealing drugs or being involved in some sort of traditional criminal activity, how incredibly difficult it must be to get a job, especially in today's economy. And when you look at the way the justice system is structured, for example, my co-defendant Andy is given a 3-year sentence, which is the maximum of this law. So he was given the maximum, but he's also given 3 years of supervised release. One of the conditions of that supervised release is that he maintains employment, and it's incredibly difficult as a felon to find employment. So if he can't find employment, especially in an economy like we have today, essentially his sentence becomes a 6-year sentence. So it really gave me some insight into how broken our justice system is.
So what can people do to support what you're doing, and what are some good steps they can take to get involved in the issues that you were involved with, that still is considered legal, that they can then make a difference even in a small way, because some people may not go as far as you go to take that stand?
Sure. It's important that everybody does something, whether it's as simple as talking to a coworker or talking to a family member about maybe trying to encourage them to, if not eliminate, at least cut back their animal consumption. It can be something as simple as that, or something as complex as running a campaign against a multinational corporation. But the important thing is doing something, is getting involved. None of us know what the key is going to be that opens the lock to animal liberation. So the best we can do is each try something that that we feel in our hearts, that we feel is going to be the most effective thing to do, and fight. And at the end of the day, hopefully one of us was right.